And because this is a strategic workshop, I thought I would start with sort of my level set, strategic level set. I know many of you who've followed me before have heard this. I know Jason and Todd have heard this so many times they can actually recite it in their sleep. But it's really important if we're going to be talking about strategy that we focus on what matters. And in all reality, the thing that doesn't matter is SharePoint. SharePoint doesn't matter. And in fact, Office 365 doesn't matter. And even the cloud doesn't really matter. What matters is the business. And the business is, and even IT doesn't matter. What matters is the business and what the business is trying to achieve, its objectives. And if you look at how businesses make decisions about what they do, there are decisions that boil down into two buckets. They are either decisions that increase value or that decrease risk. And so IT, as an organization and as a service, is only going to matter when IT itself increases value or decreases risk. So in this particular webinar, we're going to look at how this conversation of value and risk and cost and benefit apply to Office 365. So let's break this down a little bit more. Whenever we're talking about trying to achieve something, we always need to start with what the business needs. So it all does depend on what your business is trying to achieve. And of course, there's technology that can support many of those needs. Technology provides benefits. And unfortunately, that's where many organizations stop their consideration. They are sold technology as a silver bullet. Technology will provide all the benefits to answer your needs. But of course, that's not ever that simple. Those technologies, of course, come with a cost. And those costs have to be taken into consideration. And as we look at what increases value, the value discussion usually centers around either the relationship between cost and benefit or the relationship between benefit and the need of the organization. So if we're talking about increasing value, whoops, the slide is going much faster than I can keep up with. If we're talking about increasing value, we're really talking about either getting more benefit than what we're spending, or we're talking from a business perspective of getting benefit from a technology that meets a business need. But there's also, of course, the concept of risk. And risk is something we have to address today. These are the Razorblades that we'll be looking at. And risk is something that we have to take into consideration as well, because with any change, with any technology, there comes risk. And one of the talks that I give quite regularly is about architecture. And architecture is really about how you actually deliver a benefit with technology at an optimal level of cost and risk. And when you architect a technology to deliver a benefit, you're really creating a service. And in the past, those services were delivered primarily through on-prem technologies. So IT grew up as a discipline in a world where IT built the service, managed the technology, and optimized cost and risk. And what's happening today is we're moving into a world where some of that service is actually owned by other parties. Office 365, for example, owned by Microsoft and provided by Microsoft. So that technology is no longer in the hands of the organization. And instead, we're having to architect what we need for our business by pulling together existing services that we don't always control and optimizing cost and risk. And what is it that sort of pushes us to this? What pushes us to cloud services? And what are the challenges that come with them? And this cloud service, of course, we're going to talk about today is Office 365. So let's actually dive into some of the strategic values and benefits of a cloud service like Office 365. Those are the diamonds of today's event. And first, of course, is financial. What do you guys think? Are cloud services able to bring down costs for organizations, and how so?
All right, I'll take this one. Absolutely. So we discussed this in the last webinar, actually, for just a little bit. There's a net positive that you hit at a certain point with a hosted service, and it really is that CapEx, OpEx conversation that we were talking about, where going off and buying servers to do all of these things, if you can capitalize it and then depreciate the value of it over time, you're looking at that with different kind of money in most cases from a business perspective. But the reality is that there's a break-even point for it. And when you factor in the human element and what it costs for maintenance and what it costs for actually having higher speed internet at your facility in order to do that, or renting a colo facility in order to make that happen, things of that nature, going to a service-based scenario where you don't have to worry about any of those additional costs, whether it's with a service, whether it's with a hosting provider who provides all those things to you, or a service provider, which is actually providing you just the application. Either way, you're diminishing the costs that you have that are the OpEx world, that the operational expense side of things, in addition to eliminating the capital expense that you have. So
the barriers to entry are obviously a lot lower. You're not having to fork out for the infrastructure. You're not having to invest so much just to get up and running, as well as the fact that once you are supporting the business with the service, you're able to allocate those expenses into the operational expense side of the equation. Huh?
Yeah, I want to add a little more to that. So the three of us here, Jason and Dan and I, we're all fossils. We're old, and so we definitely look at business from an old standpoint. My wife works for a company that's 6 years old, and it's a software company, and it's all hipsters, and people take their dogs to work and all that kind of stuff. And they built a new building like 5 years ago. They didn't build a server room. Doesn't have a server room. Everything that they do is in the cloud. So while you guys and I are thinking about, well, we're going to take this, we're going to move our thing that's on-prem and forward, thinking about the cloud, new companies, they just don't do on-prem stuff as much anymore because of the cloud and the financial benefits and all the other things that we talk about. So it's an interesting way to see things these days.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think the elasticity is a big deal as well. You can start small and grow, and that's obviously important to those new businesses like your wife. It's also important to IT Unity. That's how we're supporting our business, by starting with using Office 365. So we're able to scale it with exactly how many employees we have and exactly the work we're doing. I think the elasticity is a big piece of it as well.
And there's another side to it that comes into play as well. It's risk. You said it up front. The risk of having to go out and shell out all that cash for something that's not going to get adoption, that you're not actually going to drive the right behaviors with. With a service-based scenario, you're paying up by the month. And you can cancel that with lower risk, or change your subscription with lower risk and lower penalties. You're not having to pay upfront and out of pocket for all of that.
Yeah, and for companies like IT Unity, which I hope will have hyperbolic growth, the startup costs are cheaper, and then as you add more people, it's just a little incremental cost. You don't have to try to size at the beginning for where you hope to be in a year or 3 years or whatever. So there's a lot of flexibility.
Yep, absolutely. So the financial benefits of the cloud are pretty easy to understand, but I think the cloud has more than just a cost story. We were talking just now about how we can scale up with the number of employees we've got and the type of work we're doing. I think the agility is a big piece of the story as well.
I completely agree with you, Dan. I talk with a lot of customers on a regular basis, and the conversation starts out with, we're a small company today. We only have 150 employees, but man, we're going to hit that big curve, and we're going to be featured, on Shark Tank, or Oprah's going to come swooping in and say, hey, I'm excited about this, and all of a sudden we're off to the races, and we've got 6,000 employees in the blink of an eye. So being able to have that, and know, well, it may not happen next month. We've talked to Oprah's people, and they say she's interested, but they've got to fit this into the schedule, and Sweeps is coming up, and we're not quite as sexy enough for Sweeps, so maybe it'll happen 2017. But Todd, you're sexy enough for Sweeps. But from a business agility perspective, it gives you the ability to say, for some of our customers, and I always refer to it as customers, because for IT, the user is the customer, right? So for the IT customer, it's what do you need? And with an Office 365, do you need an E3 license? Do you need an E1 license? Do you need a kiosk edition license? If you're only doing email, is that really what you need? So having the ability to say, I'm going to buy based upon my scale today, and if I have an enterprise agreement, I have the ability to sort of plug and play and match up the way I need to. It really does play into that space. It's very nice.
What about even down to the feature level? How many of us have been on customer sites that it took them so long and it was so expensive to roll out, let's say, Exchange 2007, that they wait years and years and years and years to upgrade to the next version. So they're on a basically fossilized version of the technology, and meanwhile their users are trying to do things that version of the technology was never even designed to do. They're trying to use it on devices, that weren't even around when the technology was released. They're trying to apply use cases to it that weren't even imagined at the time. And the business just can't even give the business users what they need because the technology is so old. And once we're in the cloud, we have the ability to take advantage of new features right when they are released. So we've got the ability to move forward quickly and to find ways to apply those technologies to make ourselves more productive and more agile as an organization.
So I do an upgrade talk now and then, and I did it at SP TechCon, and I was talking about upgrading from SharePoint 2010 to 2013, and this whole hybrid and online thing came up, and I kind of went off on a path, and I'm like, once you get your OneDrives and all some of those things, hybridy things out into the cloud into Office 365, you don't have to upgrade them anymore. And once you do decide to upgrade your on-prem stuff, the stuff you connect back up to already upgraded. So yeah, agility is a good word for it. I like it. It gives you options.
Yeah, and I mean, even like over the last couple of weeks, they've done some major upgrades to OneDrive, and now if you share a file with me, Todd, I can actually sync it into my OneDrive and have it available offline. Brand new feature. Now, if this was the old days of on-prem servers, we would have had to wait months or years for that feature to actually get baked in and released. And now, a blog entry comes up, a feature is available, and you're taking advantage of that feature the next day.
I'm going to wait until we get to the Razorblades part to burst your bubble on that one a little bit, Dan.
That's okay. We can do that too. What about what's going on inside the organization? I know one of the things that just bugged a lot of my customers, I did a lot of work with big IT organizations, is that they felt underutilized. They felt like they had gotten their degrees in information sciences, and they had learned how to code, and they had taken architecture to the extreme, and they were spending their days adding users to groups and replacing hard drives and resetting passwords. And
I think that's a personal problem. That they learn how to code. That we can't help that. That's just developers are developers. We really can't do much, but.
Sorry. IT resources are expensive, right? And I think in a lot of organizations, IT folks are basically doing what I would call monkey work. They're doing things that should and could be automated or outsourced, and they're also not enjoying doing those things. They'd rather be spending time putting together solutions to problems and finding new ways to address business needs with technology. They're not necessarily satisfied with that kind of work in the first place, so it's almost like a double loss.
Yeah, and one of the things that I mentioned this morning was when I would talk to customers about hosting, I would bring that up, and they would say, well, what we do with all of our IT staff, and I'd be like, well, those guys that you're paying however much a year to swap hard drives out and things like that, is that really what you want to be paying people for, or do you want to be paying them to do the thing that you do that makes money?
Exactly.
Yeah, and one of the things, so I'm friends, for those of you that know the website Ars Technica, I'm friends with Peter Bright, who goes by Dr. Pete's on there, and he's very famous for saying that IT folks are like janitors. And as an IT guy, that understandably upsets me a little bit, but for tasks like that, it's kind of true. It's kind of, you're just kind of cleaning up messes. Hard drive fails, you find the one where the light doesn't blink. So it's not a great job, and a lot of those people would enjoy other work better and not having to do this drudgery.
And they would certainly provide a lot more value to the organization. And I've seen this at a couple of my clients where they've made the transformation of IT from the janitor role to a strategic value center, where they're actually sitting at the table when just big decisions are being made and helping the organization figure out how it can move forward effectively with technology. And they love it because now they're being challenged to solve a problem that has never been solved before, and they've got a great toolbox of tools with which to solve the problem thanks to all the cloud services they have access to, and they are so happy as employees. That reduces attrition and increases retention, and it also means that they're actually providing a lot more value to the organization. So if you listen to Satya Nadella and you talk about the cloud, he always comes back to mobility as one of the major drivers of today. Don't suppose you guys have to worry about mobility at all there, huh?
Well, good. I'll let you start, Jason.
We get a lot of customers with that ask. They want to be in the field. They want to be mobile. They want to have access anywhere. It is the driving force behind the millennials edition of humanity. People want to be able to work wherever. I happen to be working from what appears to be a guest room in my house at the moment, and this is my home office. I'm not behind the firewall at Rackspace. I want to be able to get to my files, get to the collaboration that I need to do with my team without having to worry about where I am, and know that the information is not only accessible but it's secure. And that being one of the bigger concerns that we've been talking with customers about lately is how secure is your data? It's one of the fears that people have around Office 365 and around cloud computing is how secure is it? How safe is my data? And the mobility side of it is the scariest part of it. Is how secure are you in where you are? And being on the right networks and things of that nature. Are you opening a VPN and being able to encrypt your tunnel packets and things of that nature? The fact that the data is accessible is a huge thing. And personally, I don't want to open my firewall to let people in. I want to do that in a cloud service where, federating with an authentication provider allows me to give somebody access to data in a trusted manner, regardless of their locale and regardless of whether or not they're in an app or on a desktop. It's definitely a big thing.
Yeah, so I think the mobility, there's a couple things. So I work from home, so obviously mobility from that standpoint is important to me, and having things in the cloud makes that easier. So Rackspace is at an interesting spot where they know, they're embracing the remote worker thing. They know that that's an important group of people that they need to support, but they're also still not completely there yet. So there's definitely a schism for me as a worker between things I can easily get to outside of the firewall and things that I can't. But that's becoming a bigger and bigger deal. But the other piece of mobility is like what you can get on tablets and stuff like that. So as a worker, I like the mobility aspect because that makes it easier for me to appear like I'm at work when I'm really not. So I can get to things on my phone and on my tablets and all that kind of stuff. So I definitely like that. But then for companies, it also makes it possible for workers to work times and places they couldn't otherwise have worked. And specifically in the context of Office 365, the mobility things have this wrapper of security around them that are just crazy fun. Being able to add two-factor auth and the fact that it can track your logins geographically and all the dashboards that your tenant admins can go to see who's got the most failed login attempts, all those kind of things. I really like that aspect of it. And I did not intentionally segue into your next point.
But you did such a good job, Todd. It's almost like you're reading my mind or looking at the slide ahead of time.
Well, I think we both know I don't have that level of preparation, so that's clearly off the table.
Well, it's interesting. You both have touched on something on two sides of security. Jason, you mentioned the fact that customers tend to be concerned about security, and Todd, you mentioned that there are actually things that you can do in the cloud that are more secure than what you can do on-prem. And I actually would definitely put security in the diamonds category because I think there are so many perspectives from which what is happening in the cloud, particularly in Office 365, is more secure than what almost any client on the planet can afford to do on-prem. And let's start with how Microsoft does things behind the scenes. I don't know if you guys have been to one of their data centers. I haven't had the joy. Have you had the opportunity?
No, there's one in Des Moines. I've driven in that area, but so I'm with you. So Dan, like I said, Dan and Jason and I have known each other forever. I used to be at SharePoint 911, and I did all kinds of on-prem installs, and I would mock the cloud, and I would mock hosted things. And security was one of the things that I would make fun of the most. And then the company I worked for was purchased by Rackspace, a hosting company, and so. When they told me about all that, and they're like, okay, here's the deal. If you want to keep getting paychecks, you got to quit saying that. But they didn't just tell me to stop saying it. They educated me as to why what I was saying was incorrect. And a lot of it had to do with security and all that. And, their point was there is just a whole army of people at Rackspace that do nothing but security. And in most cases, not every case, not every customer, but in most cases, that security arm is stronger than the arm of the customer. And as a customer, as an on-prem customer, we have this illusion of security, and it kind of revolves around the idea that if anybody gets in, if we have the slightest hint that a hacker has invaded our perimeter, we can run over to the router and we can yank it out of the wall, or what I like to call the Maui effect. So that all internet is removed and the bad guys can't get in anymore. And we have that illusion of security. But what we don't realize is that's reactive. By the time we do that, the fan is already covered. But what places like Rackspace and Microsoft, to a much greater extent, do, they're proactive. They stop it before it gets to that, so you don't have to take the Maui option to save yourselves. And Microsoft does some amazing security things. They've been instrumental in breaking up multiple botnets, and they are a huge target, and so they're out there proactively taking these folks down and just making the world safer for everybody, including Office 365. So I feel pretty safe with my content up there now.
Well, and also, you can go in your organization and disconnect the router, but the reality is the vast number of security problems are within the organization itself, right? I mean, the vast majority. And when we think about the headline-grabbing security problems over the last year, almost all of them, actually all of them, were really on-prem problems. Target, Home Depot, the federal government, the list goes on and on. They were really on-prem breaches, not cloud breaches. And so, yeah, Microsoft is investing, in ways to support security that customers just can't afford to do on-prem. And then on the flip side, there's also the business-facing side of security, in that the features that Microsoft gives you to manage security and to respond to problems, I think are greater than what a lot of us have on-prem. I'm thinking things like e-discovery and data leak protection and mobile device management. That last one in particular, the ability that's now being incorporated into Office 365 to say, okay, we're firing Todd and we're going to wipe out the business data from his personal iPhone on his way out the door. Sorry, Todd, but good for the organization, right?
Everybody wins but me.
Nope, I'm not going to comment there.
Just like, don't tease me like that. Don't toy with my emotions.
A third of my meetings would go away, and then what would I do? That's no fair. No, I completely agree with you, both of you, on the security points. The biggest security hole that I've ever seen is the PEBCAP problem. The problem exists between keyboard and chair. It's the person who writes their password down under their keyboard. It's the person who tattoos it on their forehead. It becomes a problem.
Service account that doesn't expire, right?
Exactly. These are things that, in an on-prem fashion, if you're responsible wholly for your security and there's nobody pushing things down to you as security policy, as recommendations, as options that you don't have to go out and buy additional, but instead you just need to leverage and get some advice around it and then be able to do something with it. That's where the danger comes in, is not knowing how to secure yourself, and more than that, not knowing when you've had a breach. Rackspace recently, and this is not my segment of the business, just rolled out a new security service as security as a service offering. I can't even say the words correctly. Obviously, it's not my segment, but it's definitely an interesting play from us to be able to offer. And in the Microsoft space specifically, Office 365 is leading the way for us to be able to do some of these cool things. So.
Absolutely. And just to put one little button on those last two bullets there, mobility and security, people are, for very real reasons, concerned about data leaks on mobile devices. It's the old concern of leaving a laptop at the airport, and data leaks from that now is just so much greater because everyone has 2 or 3 devices, most of which are small enough to fall through a crack in the chair, that have corporate data on them. And the solution to this really is to stop trying to secure systems and start trying to secure information. And you're drawing the boundary much closer to the information, and that's done with information rights management, and that's a big piece of mobile device management. And Office 365 has that out of the box with the E3 and E4 plans. And Jason and I actually shared a customer that for years was trying to implement rights management, and it just never happened because it's complex, it's expensive, it takes a long time. And you could be up and running with information rights management in half an hour if you wanted to in Office 365, which is pretty stunning as a way to ensure security of critical information.
Yeah, and I kind of want to combine security with the business agility thing. One of the greatest things that I love about Office 365 is the security agility. So we have customers talk about this all the time, but what happens if somebody comes through with an audit and they say your stuff is accessible to the internet and you need to have multi-factor authentication, or you don't pass some certification or something? How long would it take an on-prem environment to add that?
Good
weeks,
point.
months. But if your stuff's in Office 365 and you've got an Azure AD Premium SKU, you check a box, and that's it. I mean, it can literally be done in a half an hour, and then users have to, you can set up how they want it if they want text to their cell phones or whatever. But it's just that quick, it's just that agile, and you're just that more secure.
And even if you're not in Azure AD Premium yet, to go and fire that up and take it from the standard to the premium, pretty quick and easy. I mean, it's a little longer than half an hour, 31 minutes maybe, but I mean, it's a pretty quick process to go from with that IT agility capability to just go ahead and spin. So.
Yep. So there's a lot of good reasons to move to the cloud and Office 365. We've covered some of the big ones. Let's now look at some of the sharp edges. What are some of the things that start causing pain to organizations when they move to the cloud? And we'll start with the obvious one, which is service management, which is no longer in your control. So you're basically outsourcing the actual service to, in this case, Microsoft, and that's there's a lot of discomfort associated with that. Organizations are hesitant to do that. But I think in my opinion, the real answer here is just to really understand the service and understand the SLAs. And you guys work for a hosting company, so you know about SLAs. Let's talk a little bit about those. What are some of the things people have to worry about with Office 365 SLAs?
I don't know what the hard numbers are, what the guarantees are. So the thing about this, and this is something I talk about to people all the time in the context of stuff in the news, a lot of times things make the news not because they're common, but because they're uncommon. So it's like that whole, if a dog bites a guy, nobody cares. But if a guy bites a dog, that's a different deal. So when we see, and it's been with a year and a half or so, Microsoft had a huge Exchange Online outage. It was like 8 hours, and it was like the entire business day of the East Coast. It was like 8:01 Eastern to 5:01 Eastern or something like that. And it was a huge deal, and everybody was saying, see, that's why you shouldn't put stuff in the cloud. But that was noteworthy because it doesn't happen very often, because people just weren't used to that happening. And I think back to my earlier days as a web behind the ear IT pro, Exchange went down, at least Exchange that I was trying to keep going. Exchange would go down, or email would go down multiple times a year. And when that would happen, people would just stop working. They'd just go home. And that was a thing. That was a very big risk, but we just don't have that anymore. It doesn't happen. And so I think, kind of like the illusion of security, this illusion of security or service management is something we had these nostalgic views to. But the SLAs, the service with Office 365 is pretty good. I think it's good enough, and I don't say that as dismissive. It's good enough. But I mean, I think it's adequate. It's something you can hang your business on.
I mean, the SLAs for Microsoft for Office 365 are 3 nines, right? And that's the bottom line of what they commit to. Whether or not they hit that is debatable. But when you go into the portal and you take a look at where the services are and what the uptimes look like, there are a lot of things that are in investigation, things of that nature. I mean, the fact that we see them all green sometimes is pretty. When we did our webinar time, we were pretty awesome. We hit the day where it was green. It was awesome. The reality is that when you are playing in the space with all of the different services, keeping everything exactly up and running all the time is a tough thing. There are things you have to investigate before you actually declare it as an outage. The number of true outages that we've seen in Office 365 are minimal. There are features that go down for periods of time, but as a whole, the service, you haven't seen it very often. As Todd mentioned, it's the rarity. Giving up that control means that you're giving up the ability to lay a hand on the shoulder of the person who actually goes off and is going to solve the problem. I'm okay with that because, from the perspective of I now know that there are hundreds of people who are actually going off and trying to solve that problem. If there's a bigger problem, it's not Bob. I don't trust that Bob's going to be able to solve the problem as quickly as the engineers who wrote the software that it's going to get escalated to, or the technicians who are managing the services and everything, especially when Bob is not only managing my Exchange server, he's managing my SharePoint server, he's managing the desktop, he's also making a coffee run for the CEO, and he's got to worry about whether QuickBooks is being backed up properly on the CFO's computer. So personally, from a service management perspective, I'm feeling more confident in outsourcing these types of services because I know that I'm getting a larger team for less in that particular scenario. But it is the kind of thing where a lot of the FUD comes in of, well, I don't trust it because I can't touch it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and as you said, their Microsoft's guarantee is 3 nines. I think their actual performance has been closer to 4 nines almost every month for the last year and a half. But it is kind of funny when you go to the message center, there's always something under investigation. But the key is that's generally for a very small number of customers. So, there may be one customer that's down, 0.01% of the time, for one reason, and another customer that's, down for another reason. But we see all messages, even if they're not affecting us directly. So it seems a little odd for sure. And hey, one other thing I wanted to mention here is service management obviously is important. How much is Office 365 up, for example? But we also have to think about actually stay on that previous point. We have to think about connectivity and the Maui effect today, as Todd called it, is certainly a good example of that. The cloud is completely useless to me today because I can't connect to it at all. So my business has come to a grinding halt because the internet is down. And one of the other things that I think is a razor blade related to service management is data recovery SLAs. Because when you look at Microsoft's data recovery SLA, they'll say, okay, we'll bring your data back, to a certain point in time within a certain number of hours. And that's great, but that is a service level recovery, not the kind of recovery that most businesses need. Most businesses need recovery where the CFO comes in and says, oh, I accidentally deleted, this important report for the board meeting in 10 minutes. Can you recover it? And you need to be able to go in and grab that back out and, bring it back to life. You can't wait hours, and you certainly can't roll the whole business back to a previous point in time just to recover that one document. And that's definitely a sharp edge. In fact, it's such a big one that at IT Unity, we're going to be doing a webinar specifically about that topic, about data recovery and SLAs that help cover your hindsight in about a month here. So you can find out more about that on itunity.com. But you have, uptime, connectivity, and data recovery are certainly things that need to be very carefully considered, because if 3 nines isn't enough for your business for whatever reason, you have to think about that. If the data recovery isn't going to match what you really need, that has to be taken into consideration and weighed. So all these things definitely matter. And to the next point that Jason had revealed there, I think one of the things all three of us spend a lot of time with customers trying to address is change management. One of the sharpest edges of the cloud right now is the fact that things change all the time, and they impact the business. A new feature rolls out to a user, and they don't know what it does, and they hurt themselves, or a new feature rolls out, and it causes a user to call the help desk and say, how do I use this? What do I do? And help desk says, I didn't even realize it was out. It's crazy. How do customers deal with managing change these days?
Well, a lot of people that we talk to are trying to figure out how do you turn something off.
Right
out of the gates, what is Sway? Why do I want my users using Sway? Having somebody call in and say, I've spent 3 hours trying to build a Sway. How do I do this? What is it? Well, first, if they're spending 3 hours trying to figure out Sway, then they're doing something wrong, because Sway is pretty simple. But take that as the example. I want to be able to make sure the customer caused me to go out to Nick Patel's blog yesterday. I tweeted the link to how do you disable OneDrive for Business in Office 365, because the customer just not ready to roll it out yet. They want to take and move a little bit slower, and they want to roll out SharePoint, they want to roll out Exchange Online, but they're not ready to fully adopt OneDrive for Business yet. They want pieces of this to come out. And so this change under the covers is a very scary thing for them. So a lot of it is, how do I obfuscate and say, look over here, this is the thing we're doing. I'm not ready to roll out everything in the suite yet. How do I roll out pieces and parts? And as things are changing, how do I go off and, the things that I can't turn off, I need somebody in first release to be able to test this. And now we can go off and say, we just want one part of the tenancy to be in first release, be able to use some of these features and test it out, create the training and adoption, information so that we can make sure that these things get done properly. But that's what it is. Oftentimes we run into problems where customers are saying, I don't want my user to have this. And so you end up going either to a custom solution or having to turn something off completely. So.
Yeah, and part of that, and Microsoft's kind of, so I used to work for a software company, so I'm sympathetic to Microsoft and a lot of software problems that they have. But one of the decisions they made with this was when new functionality comes out, they turn it on by default, which is, how this ends up happening. So, you're an Office 365 admin, and you're going along, and it's humming along, and you're doing very little, and you're watching funny cat videos on the web, and life's grand. And then all of a sudden, a bunch of people start calling up because there's a new icon somewhere, and you didn't know anything about it, and now a bunch of them have it, and they're confused, and you have to go in and shut it off. And it's all because Microsoft wants these features to be used, and so by default, when a feature is ready, it's just on, and then you have to go later and shut it off. And I think the whole change management thing is really the biggest complaint people have now. I know one of the funniest, because there are so many funny stories about people getting frustrated, but Sean McDonough was going to do a session at SB TechCon a year ago about something in Office 365, and the day of his session, they changed the interface, and it was gone. It was just not there anymore. And so he's in the speaker room that morning going, it was here yesterday. It was right over here. And what do you do? That's just...
to throw some fuel on the fire, I was in the middle of a demo of Yammer and showing off the fact that you can comment on docs on a PowerPoint slide, and had the Yammer pane on the right-hand side. And in the middle of my demo for a customer, it disappeared.
Permanently, forever.
Permanently. No notification. In the middle of my demo, it was there at the beginning. It was like, okay, so let's show it what it does on another user. And it was gone. We flipped users and gone. Went back to the first, gone. That's an unfortunate happenstance. Usually they give us better notifications than that, and they've made commitments since that point to make sure that does happen with the roadmap changes and whatnot. But that does happen with a cloud service sometimes. So it is definitely a razor blade for me, and it's definitely a barrier to user adoption, because we were ready to roll that out, and they were very excited about that feature. And all of a sudden, it wasn't there anymore, and so they stopped the rollout of Yammer because of that. We were showing user groups, and they said, well, we can't roll this out if it's going to continually change like this. Then you're not rolling out Office 365.
Right. It's almost like we went from, for years of on-prem, wishing we could do things that we couldn't do until 3 years later, to now being able to do things that we have no clue how to do. The model's completely flipped on its head now.
Yep.
And I think there's just going to be some moving to acceptance on that. I think we're just going to have to adjust our thoughts.
Absolutely, and Microsoft's going to have to work harder as well, and they're doing that, to give them credit. First release is a little about a year old here. They've updated first release with some new features. The roadmap's getting better, but yeah, they're going to have to work harder, and we as customers are going to have to be ready to manage the change that comes down the pike, because there will always be that change that we weren't prepared for. All right, let's move on. So we don't run out of time completely. Adoption. So Microsoft rolls out a change, or there's a whole new set of capabilities in Office 365 that maybe we didn't even use on-prem. Maybe we weren't SharePoint customers on-prem. We were just Exchange. Or maybe we didn't use Skype for Business. Or maybe we didn't use Power BI, or some of these things that exist only in the cloud, like Office Graph and Delve. What are companies to do to help drive adoption, which therefore drives the value of the service as a whole?
Tyler, let's just start on this one.
So that's one of those things, those people that used to swap out the dead hard drives and all that, this is hopefully one of the ways that they will find gainful employment, is trying to help that. And part of it is that change management, that the new features are going to pop up, and hopefully that will help users adopt them and start using them. But I think you know, as a SharePoint consultant, I see this all the time. People say, I wish SharePoint did this, or we're going to hire a developer to do that. And I'll be like, well, it's already there if you just do the thing and turn this on. And did you know this web? So having people, IT staff that focuses less on keeping the lights on and more on how to use the product and getting it to be functional for the end user, I think that's going to be a good thing, and I think that'll help adoption.
And for me, the Razorblade is it does require planning. And oftentimes companies, they want a ready, fire, aim kind of mentality. Let's go do it, and let's come back and see if it works. The biggest problem that I've run into with Office 365 is it's in everybody's EA. They have it, and so they go and they'll turn it on. They'll go, here's everything. Go use it. It's everything under the sun. Enjoy. And there was no planning to it. There was absolutely no forethought given to it. And now all of a sudden you've got 5 different groups leveraging 5 different tools in Office 365, all for the exact same function. And that's a problem. Some people are using Yammer, people are using Office 365 groups, some people are using team sites, some people are using the old communities, some people are using noteboard, message boards, and then some people are just using email to communicate and collaborate around things. Instead of coming up with an adoption plan and saying, here are the ways that we want to engage in these different pieces, it definitely is, as Microsoft rolls out new features and new functionality and the breadth of the suite, it is a danger for a lot of customers to look at and say, I don't know what to do. And they run into either this wide open, I'm going to let everybody do whatever they want, or we're going to close the gates and it's going to be analysis paralysis, and they never get started. So, two killers of adoption in my book.
And I think the flip side of adoption is the next Razorblade, which is support. How do you actually skill up your IT organization to support users? And similarly, how does the support relationship change on the back end, where, as Todd was saying, I think earlier, you used to be able to go put your hand on the shoulder of the person who was running the service. Now it's Microsoft, which is, a support call or a support ticket away. It's a completely different relationship, both on the end user support and the IT support, isn't it?
Yeah, it definitely is. And there's a risk in that as well. That do you have the right staffing model for it? The support of the big bearded suspender wearing Linux or DBA, and granted I've got the big goatee going on, but you get the point. Are they the right person to go out and help the business drive things in the right way, take advantage of the newer features that are rolling out? And is it something that we should be looking at different types of staffing for different things? There's still an important factor that we haven't talked about on this particular webinar. We talked about it a lot on the last one, which is the hybrid scenario. And how do you support for that? How do you look at the world and say which pieces are going to live where, and how are we handling the support for that, and the training that comes along with it, and starting to take a look at where we're heading in the next wave with the whole 16 wave. But support is definitely a big concern and a big issue. We have a massive support team at Rackspace, and that's what we do. So for me, it's watching and learning and seeing how we're training people up is a unique education sitting in the castle when I actually get to go there. And seeing how we're skilling people up and making sure that we're training people into the right skill sets to be able to help users and help administrators do the right thing with Office 365.
And why don't you bring up that last Razorblade, by the way, because you started touching on the concept of integration and migration and the fact that this stuff doesn't happen all at once. It's going to happen slowly, so we're going to have to decide what lives where, like you said. We're going to have to get data from point A to point B, and we're going to have to integrate. Not only cloud service to cloud service, but cloud service to on-prem.
Absolutely. And a lot of where we're heading in this world is how do I get my data to all be in seemingly one place, even though it's in disparate places? How do I find that happy point where my users have that quote-unquote single pane of glass, that app launcher where now I have a Salesforce tile, if I'm using that as my CRM instead of Dynamics, and be able to pull these things in and make it easy. And that does take some customization into that environment. And how do I move my data around, things that are in older data sets? If I still have a FoxPro database sitting out there, how do I move that data out of there and pull it into something that's a little bit more modern? Don't think it doesn't happen. There are lots of customers who are still using SQL 2000. out there. And how do we modernize some of these things? How do we support what we have, and how do we get it out of there and move it into this new world? You know, whether it's in Azure or whether it's sitting in a hosted data center or if it's in Office 365.
I am always surprised. So the Microsoft MVP Summit is in a couple of weeks, and I'm always surprised, you know, when you see people, their badge says their name and all that kind of stuff, and it says what they're an MVP in. There are still Fox Pro MVPs running around. So God bless them. It's out there. You also touched on the thing earlier, Jason. The reason I never was able to get comfortable with Linux and be a Linux guy is because I can't grow a beard. So I was stuck doing Microsoft stuff.
I'm doubling down for you this month. So yeah.
I appreciate that.
Not a problem, man. I got your back.
Well, I think these Razorblades kind of illustrate, as Jason was saying earlier, well, I don't remember which of you said it because you look so similar. I get you two confused. But one of you was saying. The people who used to remove the hard drive and add the users to the groups and back up the QuickBooks, those people now need to be focused on these things. These are the things that are the core of the new IT, so to speak. This is where their time, their effort needs to be focused. This is where their skills need to be brought up to address. And that leads us into a couple of our points of guidance here. If we can go to the next slide, which is first, you really have to understand what the skill of your okay, yeah, that was sort of the summary of all of them. We can skip to the next one. You have to really know where your IT organization skills lie, because where they have gaps, those are going to be success blockers. And I can think of a couple of scenarios here. First is, let's say, let's just go back to that first point. Let's say, for example, you've got a team that's really good in Exchange. They might be able to help you migrate to Exchange Online. But if they're so focused on migration, they may not actually focus on learning about the new features that are available in the current version of Exchange in Office 365 and driving adoption of those features and pulling business value out of those features. They're just doing what they know how to do. So there's a bit of an opportunity cost there. And I mean, Todd, you lived in SharePoint. I mean, how many organizations are there that really are ready to migrate SharePoint to the cloud?
Not a lot. Migration is tough, and yeah, there's a lot of consideration to it, especially when you start talking about moving it into the cloud, because now you've got the whole identity piece and all the widgets around identity and getting that working. And
Jay, you have any thoughts on this skills gap point? Sorry.
I'm driving the slides today, folks, and it's stressing me out a little bit here. Sorry. It's you know, public speaking for dozens of people, no problem. But man, driving slides for Dan, this is a stressful job. Let me tell you. As far as the gap around skills, it is it's cost prohibitive on top of everything else to help an employee who has aging skills come up to speed. It's a tough thing when you can just go hire someone right out of college who all they've ever known is the newest, latest, and greatest. We want to make sure that we're bringing along the people that have made our companies the vibrant, thriving thing that they are, and it's definitely something that you have to invest in people in order to make sure that you're bringing them up the right way. And it also is a tough thing to do when you have smaller IT staffs.
Absolutely. And so that we can sort of start bringing this home, because we're running out of time here, the second piece of guidance really is a theme that we've touched on a number of times, which is this is a big piece of what's happening today is a disruption of what IT used to be. And the fact is that IT now is going to be very, very different moving forward. It's going to be about aligning with the business and helping the business solve problems more, and less about keeping the lights on and being janitors. And we really, as customers, have to keep our eye on helping our IT organization make that transition, because if we don't, IT will simply fail to serve any value whatsoever. And we can go to the next one just so we're running out of time. And that sort of leads us to something that, as I was sort of putting my thoughts together for the white paper that accompanies this webinar, and I was thinking about the different ways organizations can basically avoid those razor blades and maximize the value out of both the service itself and the transformation of IT. it really seems to me that what we need to start thinking about partnering up with organizations that really do things right. Very, very much like the same reason we're moving to the cloud. We're moving to the cloud because it's cheaper, it's more flexible. The cloud is able to scale with us. Similarly, we have to look on the service side and say, okay, I don't know everything about Office 365. My staff doesn't have all the skills it needs. I don't have the resources to drive adoption and to manage change. So who can I turn to actually help me do that? And I don't know if this term actually exists in the industry or not. I made it up as I was writing the white paper in the bullet point here. But I came up with this term of service partners, and it really was not to blow smoke into your guys' rear end, but it really was to talk about companies like Rackspace, because I think what you guys are doing is you're specializing in those razor blades. You're specializing in turning them in from, taking them from being sharp edges to being something that makes your face look absolutely beautiful and smooth, like Mr. Todd Klindt. And I think that's a really valuable role for organizations like Rackspace. And if I have a couple of visuals here, I'll sort of tell you what I was thinking as I was mulling this over in my head. And that is, in the past, IT was really about managing all of the technology, the architecture, balancing the cost and the risk. And as we mentioned, today we're sort of moving into this world where the service is sort of moving a little bit away from IT. The actual technology, in the case of Office 365, is out of the hands of IT, but that leads to those sharp edges that we were talking about. And I think the answer on the next slide is to bring in service partners, organizations that have the expertise in the service, have the expertise in how to drive adoption, how to minimize risk, how to maximize value, how to provide support, and how to guide organizations to make the most of the incredibly rich capabilities of Office 365. And I think by bringing in, let's call it a service partner, like a Rackspace, who does this for their job and for the well-being of their organization, that allows IT then to move closer to the business. And you notice that IT moves out of being just about the technology, and it moves towards the business need itself. And it allows IT to spend those cycles, to focus those skills and those talents and the passion around technology to actually solving the business need itself. Is that what you guys find with the customers that you have who are taking advantage of Rackspace for this kind of role?
That's exactly what my role is at Rackspace, Dan. I came here specifically to do what you just mentioned, which is to provide the expertise and the guidance around what to do with technology, what to do with all the new stuff. How do you find success with that which is unfamiliar to you? Because you have been running commodity resources and commodity services for your company for so long. How do you make the next jump, and how do you really maximize it and move on to being that true innovation technology partner for your customer, for the end user, and leave that which is commodity and leave that which is day-to-day to someone else. But beyond that, take it to one step further and understand what the advisory side of it is, and know that you have someone who's a trusted partner to be able to provide that expertise level that is staying up to date on the latest and greatest technology, that it's not having to be something that you keep inside your four walls, but it really is something that comes from outside as well. So that's my take on it.
Todd?
I agree, and we're moments over, so I don't want to get into a big soliloquy, but yeah, that's what's fun about this job and working at Rackspace, is that we get to stay on the cutting edge of all this fun stuff, and we get to help people do that, the new things, and it's very rewarding.
Yeah, and I think one of the key points that that I always like to remind customers is you want to take advantage of specialties and economies of scale. And so a company like Rackspace has entire teams focused on adoption and on support and on change management and on how to maximize value from new technologies. Whereas in my organization, I'm trying to sell widgets. That's not I need to focus on that. And by leveraging expertise and experience that you guys have and that service partners have, that allows me to get my real business done better. And I think one of the things that makes this new world of IT different than the old world of outsourcing, which I'm old enough to have lived through several ways of outsourcing. I think what makes it different now is that it's really clear that that the business needs to focus on the business. We should never outsource getting our business done, because we're the ones who know how we do what we do. We're the ones who know what our strategies are and what our objectives are. We as a business need to focus on what we do, selling widgets. But we pull in people to help us figure out how to do that better with technology, how to do that better with a complex and powerful and costly and risky service like Office 365. And I think that's where a service partner can play a role. So we've talked through a number of the strategic drivers towards going to the cloud, the diamonds as we call them. We talked about a number of the Razorblades, the challenges. And in the end, I think one of the interesting trends that I've watched, and I know it's a little bit odd having you guys here as rappers, so I know you're having to take off your independent hat here and put on your rapper hat for a second, as I thank you guys for really being leaders in this space and really helping customers adapt to these changes and avoid the Razorblades while making the most of Office 365. So thank you guys and the company you work for. I've really seen the value you deliver to some of my customers. So thank you guys for that, and also thank you for having your MVP hats on for most of today and helping us, really talk very clearly about the realities of moving to the cloud. Thank you guys, and thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Pleasure. Thanks.